What do you think, Gary? You think that you're ready for football season?
John, when I see that running out of the tunnel, I'm ready to do anything, man. I'm ready to fire out there and get out there and play for Coach and play for Clemson or whoever that is, because it kind of gets you in the mood right away. All those people, all those fans, the great big building. Oh, my goodness, it's so good.
Yeah, I cannot wait. I miss football season, especially college football. It's like my favorite time of year, and that's all I think about. But we're a little bit away from that now, so I have to kind of pause that in my brain and pretend like it's not coming for another 4 or 5 months. So,
well, it's nice to have something on the horizon there you can look forward to, and when you see that, it just kind of gets you excited. You hear that music and so forth. But, something interesting about that stadium too, isn't there?
Yeah. Where do you think that is? Do you think that's out in the country, away? Because if it was me and it was what the community would want, you think you'd put a stadium in the middle of nowhere, away from everybody, the noise away from everybody, the traffic. Going to football games, the traffic going into a stadium. You wait for hours to get in and out. It usually affects, a lot of the streets and roadways, all the events. Where would you guess?
I would guess it's probably somewhere right there around the campus on Clemson, and somewhere near the neighborhood, and somewhere near people where you're going to be able to use the city and so forth around the area. I would think that's probably tied together. Hotels, the whole thing.
It's built right beside a cemetery.
What?
Right on a cemetery.
Wow.
So it's actually the stands. When I was down there about 2 years ago, looking at the campus and doing a little tour, did a tour of the stadium. And one thing I was shocked by is the proximity to the cemetery. And given our experience with one of our projects that was right beside a cemetery and kind of the public backlash from a small group, but still, had a big backlash, building beside a cemetery seems like it should never be done. Seems like that you shouldn't even think about building close to one. But what's crazy is, from our experience, before we purchased that property, we actually did some research. And we actually went in and looked at other cemeteries in the area here in Central PA.
Right.
Also in the area with the same guy who had bought the cemetery. He owned a couple other cemeteries. So we wanted to see what was it like around the cemeteries that he already owned and was already managing for years. And we couldn't come back with anything that wasn't out in the wide open. Every cemetery that we went to was developed around. And if you look on the screen, one of the other cemeteries that the same owner owned, do you see any clear space around here?
I don't see a lot of clear space around there at all. And in fact, I see the York Expo Center kind of right across the street there as well. And it's kind of tucked in there with a lot of other things around. Although I've been by that cemetery a lot. That's Greenmount. And very tastefully done. Everything's in order there. Doesn't look like anything's really happening badly. So
no, you see a Lowe's home improvement store that's built there. You see a quarry with blasting, active blasting behind it. You see the fairgrounds that are right down the street, almost adjacent. You see a big storage unit, people coming in and out, with their storage. You see some residential communities, another little school. So would you say that that's been developed around?
I would say it's definitely been developed around. And I guess one of the questions I have, John, is as you look at that kind of thing, are there any rules that say that anything shouldn't be built around a cemetery? In other words, there should be a segregation of things away from the cemetery, because as I look at that, it fits in very tastefully there, and yet at the same time, you've got stuff going on around it because it's part of the city.
Yeah, and I think that to answer your question, there's not a rule. There's zero rules that are against building around a cemetery. And from our research, it's been, most cemeteries, if not all of them, are built around. And even some prestigious cemeteries down in the DC, Virginia area have developments around them. And it's typical in when you have space, especially in an urban infill space, that every little square inch of space gets utilized. When you're in proximity to major roadways, Pennsylvania Avenue, Route 30, Route 83, any little piece of property that can be developed typically gets developed. And one of the rumors of this project that we were building is that we were taking up gravestones, and one of the rumors that got spread were we were going to create a highway through the cemetery, dig up the graves, and move bodies. And
wow,
now that is illegal.
Telling a lie. I mean, and I think I asked you before. I said you don't have a division that digs up cemeteries, and I don't think you'd have a division that makes roads through cemeteries as well. So that sounds like kind of a silly thing and someone really trying to just make their point, and it's ridiculous. I mean, it really is.
Yeah, there's another cemetery that Dylan's picking up on the screen here too. Is where do you think that is? You might have passed that at the same time.
Yeah, that's right here in York as well. And I forget what the name of that is. Mount Rose Cemetery, I think, is what we're looking at right there. But man, you talk about being built around. Got a highway to the backside of it. You've got all kinds of housing across the street from it. It goes right into a really big, busy district. So, but again, very spacious cemetery, very tastefully done. I've been to, unfortunately, some funerals there, and I remember being at the funeral, and I don't remember ever being bothered too much by noise or anything like that because you're in that moment. So yeah, I mean, I don't know what you say about that. But it is right there. And when you go inside there, you know you're in a cemetery. And when you go outside there, you know you're in the city.
Yeah, and it actually shares. If you look right across the street, there's a warehouse, a large warehouse that actually shares the same entrance. That's directly across the street, coming in and going out. So it's actually warehousing across the street, which is a kind of a negative word in this area today. You have residential would be the southwest side. Due east, you have commercial, and the lower section that is undeveloped is actually been in for development for a while.
Wow!
So it would leave no space, the whole way around it.
So when you talk about cemeteries and you talk about building next to cemeteries, obviously we've seen two right here so far that are built around, and we have a lot more cemeteries you could look at as far as examples, not only here in the York area but elsewhere. So the question is, what's the problem when you want to do some building next to a cemetery? I mean, aside from digging up graves and running a highway through that, which you're not doing, and you're not disrespecting the cemetery in any way, shape, or form, it seems like there's some landmines here that we're looking at right now that people just want to kind of lay for you in terms of making it hard to do that. Why would you want to do that, again, when you can have tax-paying properties right there that are going to be helping the community in the long run?
Yeah, that going back in time, and I'll give you the short, long story of this whole project and this property. We had grown up going here to the cemetery. My grandparents are buried there, a couple of my aunts. But what's interesting about this is my uncle Dick and his dad, Dick Sr., actually worked this cemetery and maintained this cemetery for over 55 years.
Wow.
So growing up, when you go into their office, there's actually a picture of both of them. They were in the newspaper. So I have a lot of experience, a lot of history going in and out of the cemetery. And about 12 years ago, the owner of the cemetery, the previous owner, had come to me and I had went to him and I'd said, would you subdivide a piece of the property off that we can move our company here? So you have great access, it's a great location. And at that point, the deal kind of went a different direction. We couldn't really afford to do that at that point. I was always looking visionary into the future. But I learned a lot about the property then, going through the due diligence, what we were going to do. And it was actually this piece of property that we ended up purchasing about 11 years later. And we had met with the owner and looked at the property and said, hey, once it got rezoned, we thought it would be good use for industrial use. Right. So we got it rezoned to that. And the seller got it all rezoned, and then we had purchased this right after that. So we went into this with a property that was approved industrial, rezoned from residential to industrial. And at that point, there was no public pushback. There was no negativity. That sat there for a year. And for a year, it just sat there, approved industrial site. We never submitted any land development plans. And then what we did was we got hooked up with an industrial broker, and he dripped out a little bit of information. And it was all, a potential warehouse. We had no plans for the property, just was rezoned industrial. What we didn't realize was how wanted and sought after that location would be for industrial property. And we actually went back to the zoning hearing board that ended up, blowing this all up. And the zoning hearing board, being rezoned industrial, actually gave us a reduced setback because it was beside a cemetery. And kind of one of the jokes through the conversations were, I don't think the neighbors are going to put up any of a fight, not much of a fight.
Right.
And we don't take that lightly because we understand the emotional, and the spiritual, everything that's tied to a family member that passes away.
It's not disrespectful at all in any way, shape, or form. Yeah.
And that's one thing that Jeff and I were very, very conscious about the whole way through the design of what we were designing on the property. And we didn't want to come in here, do something that wouldn't fit the area. So we had a tastefully designed, totally separate entrance, brand new entrance for the cemetery, separate entrance for this industrial parcel. And then this small Facebook group came out that kind of painted everything in a bad light. Took the Stop the Warehouse groups. And as we discussed before, the NIMBYs came out, not in my backyard.
Right.
So that whole process was then about another year and a half of going back and forth of fighting the zoning. And when we were going through that, what sucked is we had a Fortune 50 company ready to come and build a manufacturing facility on this property. And because of an NDA, like I can't explain who it is, I can't tell you who it is.
Right.
But it was somewhat similar to like a Harley Davidson or a Caterpillar. And what Jeff and I were thinking as we creating communities and we're trying to grow jobs, make the area better, it would have provided $35 to $45 an hour jobs, good high paying jobs, full benefits. And they really wanted to do a manufacturing facility here. It was one of their large endeavors. They love the location. They love the access to the city for workers being able to get there for public transportation. Not having to drive there would have cut down the transportation cost. So it lined up perfectly. We went from an LOI to a contract, and they got wind in their due diligence that there was going to be a contest against the zoning. So somebody was going to dispute the zoning, which turned out to be the Facebook group / the owner of the cemetery that purchased the cemetery after we purchased our parcel that connected to the cemetery. So he had known this was rezoned industrial. He had known this whole process. So he purchased the cemetery. So then it became a legal battle. And for over a year and a half, we'd be in a legal battle with the zoning. And during that process, we lost that tenant that was going to come there. Like I said, Fortune 50 company, traded on the NASDAQ, would have been a great, great improvement to this area, and got blown up from a small group of people, back to my analogy where it's less than 1% of York County, curbed a development project that would have gotten a Fortune 50 company to come there.
And again, what's the main reason that they did that?
The only thing was proximity to the cemetery. Yeah, and that was the only reason that they were shooting it down.
So the idea is you could build it next to somebody else's cemetery or build it next to someone else's property or in someone else's place, but not here. Not here because we don't want it to be here. And not because you're disrupting anything, not because you're using another same entrance, not because you're sharing the same property or you're doing anything in a desecrating type way. Just we don't want it here.
Yeah, and that's when we were looking at this property. For years and years and years, we dreamed of what could go there. And when you take a map and you zoom out of an area,
right,
and you're like, what could be good to develop? You look at school districts, you look at taxes, you look at your access to utilities. You take all that information to put it together, and you say, okay, there's a finite amount of land that you can develop in this core area. And when we zoomed in, it was like, well, this has been sitting here for years. When we met with the original owner, I asked him, I said, well, what's the reason why you wouldn't just keep this as a cemetery,
right,
and expand into this open area? And he said, John, we've done studies and studies and studies, and we've actually got to see them, that the amount of people to the tune of 70% of burials today are cremations. Mm-hmm. So they're going to mausoleums. They're not even going directly into the ground in direct burials. That was a thing of the past. And he said, given our timeline of how many burials we've done each year for the last 30 years, it would take us another 112 years to develop this cemetery, all of our direct burials, 112 years. He said, John, he's like, if that increases to 75, 80%, he said, I'd be 150 years. So there was really no reason to hold this land outside of just holding the land.
Right.
So from that standpoint, it just made sense. Sell the property, put it into good use, a tax base, providing jobs. And that's what led us down the road to be able to develop it as an industrial site instead of doing anything else.
So as you look at this whole thing right now, again, this is a landmine along the way. I mean, you got to step around it. And yet at the same time, it holds us up from really developing the whole community right here. And of course, York, I think you're looking at it from a positive standpoint. What can we do to get money produced in York? What can we do to get a better tax base in York? What can we do to provide jobs in York? These are people that are going to be able to come into the city. Mobility is a factor. As you look at this whole thing and you say these landmines kind of come up, what would you do differently now if you go back and look at this whole thing if you had a different way to go about it?
I think if I went back and did this again, there's a law that if you get a plan, you submit a plan,
right,
and that gets preliminary approval, there's a 90-day clause to that if after the 90 days, if it's not appealed the plan, it would be approved. You could not go back and then try to change the zoning. So there wouldn't have been no reverse in zoning. And that would be one thing that I would have done. But given the fact that we had such a backlash and the rumors that were spreading lies, I probably would have went and did a development meeting ahead of time. Now, given we did have those after the fact, after this got blown up, and the development meetings went nowhere because the end of the day, they just wanted to be nothing. And nothing only serves 150 people. The other 600,000 people in York, that kids are coming along, families are trying to grow, people are trying to get ahead. They want jobs, they want opportunities.
Right.
And that's what we were trying to create here. And the other thing that I probably would have done differently if I could have done something differently was I would have went back from the very beginning and I would have designed a building before anything went out to the market. And I would have got that building fully approved or had a tenant in place before anybody in the market knew. And it sounds shady. It sounds like it's quiet, like you're trying to do things into the dark. But if I could have created 250 jobs here, our company, high-paying jobs, would you consider that bad or good?
I'd say it's pretty good. Yeah, absolutely.
If I were to say they were high-paying jobs with full benefits, retirement, you probably would agree with me. It's good for the community.
I think anything like that is probably good for the community and helps people and helps the community at large.
So the argument is it's beside a cemetery. And because of that, when I think about going back in time and what I would have done differently, it would have been really hard to predict that because before we even purchased the property, before we even had the concept of even developing something here, we went back and we visited other properties. And if you go right up Susquehanna Trail, and Dylan's going to put that up on the screen here, right up Susquehanna Trail that's in this current township where this project is, the cemetery sold the land to a developer to develop it. Years ago for a warehouse, later on for residential, for a single-family home development. So this concept of developing around a cemetery, even in this township, is not foreign. It's not like something that's never been done. So if I could go back in time, I could have relived this. I still probably would have landed in the same place. There's just little tactical items I would have done differently. And one thing that never changes from an Inchico's standpoint is that we want to be able to provide good housing, good jobs, and opportunities. So the people that don't want those opportunities or don't want to increase, that's not really who we're aiming towards. We're aiming towards the people that have small families, young families, individuals, singles that want to get better, want to grow, and we want to provide them housing and opportunities to be able to get to that next level in their life.
And I think anytime you talk about that, I think it comes back to what's your philosophy. And the philosophy I think these people have tried to paint is, well, you're coming in there and you're taking this, and you're being disrespectful to the land next to the cemetery and all that. When in reality, if people look at it, and I think most people probably do, the idea is you're trying to help York. You're trying to help York to grow. You're trying to help using things that are totally legal, using an area that is totally set aside, using an area that's not producing anything right now. And then at the end of the day, you want it to produce something for the community, again, in a very respectful fashion. And again, talking about your lineage and the fact that you have relatives buried there, obviously you're not going to do something that's going to desecrate the memory of those relatives. And so when you look at that whole philosophy compared to we don't want it next door to a cemetery, it kind of pales in significance, doesn't it?
Yeah, it seems very foreign. It seems something that would be good for the area is the NIMBYs come out, in Thrives and say, this is not good for here. And it even got to the point to where, the rumors and lies that were swirling, it actually got funny to Jeff and I because there were so many things that were flying around during that time. And in a small town, word gets around fast.
Yes.
And when you're a small town developer, the word gets around so fast. And what we learned is that if we didn't control the narrative, as we're doing here today, and explaining to people how things happen, the progress, we probably could have curbed a lot of this early on. But because I was on the township board and because, I was not trying to promote this project, I was so far away removed from this project. I never voted on it one time. I never voted on anything that had anything to do with this project. I kept myself so pulled away And I think it actually did damage, being on the board at that time, because I put our board in a tough position. When you're on a township and you're also a developer, it just becomes he's hiding something in there. And that's never been the case, and that's not how Jeff and I have ever operated, where we do things behind the curtain. But one tool that we could have used, should have used, and something that we use a lot is a community betterment agreement.
What's that?
And if you look at all these big projects that get done, and you look at the LERTA approvals, and you look at the township approvals, one of the projects that we had on here, our last time we spoke, was this Bear Road project. Huge project, 214-acre industrial project. Warehouses, 3 warehouses. A community betterment agreement is an agreement between the municipality, city, borough, and the developer. So a developer's agreement basically dictates what you're going to do when you develop the property. If you say, hey, I'm going to, improve this right away, or I'm going to improve this access, or I'm going to, bring a sewer line 3 miles up the road so that the future communities are able to tap into that sewer line, that's all laid out in the developer's agreement. And developer basically says, this is what I'm going to do, along with bringing my project to your area. On top of that, a community betterment agreement, we call them CBAs. CBAs allow you to then go over and above that and say, hey, what do you need in the township? What do you need in your city? Does the city need, a new bus? Does the city need new fire trucks? Does the city need a new recreational center? And they use that as a tool to be able to get projects approved. And it's basically a legal way to be able to suck more money out of a developer. And in this project specifically, we use none of those mechanisms. For us, we're just, here's what we think. It looks like a great project. We've done our research years in advance, and we bring it to the community thinking, okay, this is well thought through. And boy, did we step into a landmine.
And those landmines continue to come up along the way, but in this particular case, a few people holding up the progress for a lot of people at the end of the day. Just one of the things that happens with a small town developer, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's what people underestimate is social media and the power of social media today. And the people that utilize it the best go the farthest, and the people that duck away from it, if you're going to be in a position where you're going to grow a company, you got to engage it. And I think what we've learned from a project like this is that you need to engage on social media, and you need to engage in the community when you're trying to do large-scale projects to the size that we're trying to do.
Just trying to give you the whole picture here and what it's like to be a developer and some of the landmines you have to get around, but also maybe the whole picture. Instead of just a little part of the picture that you've heard about in social media, you get the whole picture right here on Small Town Developer.